back to another SummerSlam Rewind. I am going back and watching every single SummerSlam, and this is now episode 2. I'm dropping daily videos here on the channel. So from July 1st through July 31st, you will be getting a SummerSlam Rewind video. This one's I'm particularly really excited about because we're going to be talking about SummerSlam 1991 and finally, the year I was born, 1992. So there's a lot to dive into. But speaking of being born, we all know what has to happen to make another human. So with that being said, friendly reminder that Bluechew wants to sponsor your SummerSlam. When you're ready to serve your big English breakfast, make sure you're using Bluechew. Become your partner's Macho Man. Make your warrior ultimate. By using Bluechew, you'll have better, longer-lasting sex. The links to that will be in the description box below. Now let's go ahead and get into SummerSlam 1991. So just a heads up so that there's a little bit of clarity. When it came to my first video, which I was covering SummerSlam 1988 through 1990, those ones I was watching for the very first time. However, with these next two SummerSlam, things are a little bit different. Now, growing up, the person that got me into pro wrestling was my uncle. And so my uncle would show me a lot of wrestling, old wrestling, just things before my time. And so there was a lot of stuff that he has shown me for SummerSlam. However, I had never watched the shows completely all the way through. So there was moments where I was like, oh yeah, I remember this. I saw this. So that was kind of fun to watch because some things definitely triggered my memory and other things, well, was an entirely different experience. But let's get to it. So two big things that I noticed about SummerSlam 1991 right off the bat was that the show format just flowed a lot smoother. I felt like it didn't feel as formulaic as the ones before previously did. It didn't feel like stop and go. Instead, it was this nice continuous flow of matches, promos, and things like that. A little bit more of what we're accustomed to nowadays. Of course, still a lot different because we're talking about the early 90s, but still just a lot more smoother. So the other thing that I noticed about SummerSlam 1991 was that I felt that the matches on the card felt like they had a little bit more purpose. The stories felt like they meant something versus the previous shows. I kind of felt like there were some matches that, of course, had their stories, sure, but then there was other matches where I was kind of like, damn, I just feel like this was just thrown together and didn't really move anything forward. So those were two of the big things that I noticed right off the bat with 1991 SummerSlam. But let's go ahead and get into the top highlights of the show for me. So, of course, one of the big things that you think about when you think about this SummerSlam is the wedding. So I'm going to go ahead and start there. Now with this one, it was a little bit different because of course I've seen the wedding a million times at this point where I feel like we see it all the time and even just like little throwbacks and things like that. So it's really wasn't anything new for me seeing the Macho Man Miss Elizabeth wedding. But what I did think I would share for this particular video was my original thoughts when I first watched it. So when I first got shown this by my uncle, he didn't really tell me anything. Like he would just show it to me and I didn't have any of the pieces or anything like that. Like I was just shown the information and I wasn't given any other context about anything, right? So watching this when I was younger, I remember just thinking that this was their real wedding. Like that's honestly what I thought. And I didn't know until years later that it wasn't their real wedding. I didn't find out until I got like a little older. And I remember sort of being brokenhearted by that. And also, the other thing now being much older and knowing so much more about everything is that it's sort of heartbreaking to see this moment that to me is supposed to be very sweet. And obviously, it's a man and a woman getting married, and you're like, oh my God, true love, blah, blah, blah. I'm so happy. And kind of knowing the real life marriage situation with Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth, I think that kind of impacts me when I watch it, but I try to not think about it and I try to stay in this little kayfabe world where everything is perfect and it's all rainbows and butterflies. And so I watched this and I still like it because it's a wedding. And who doesn't like weddings, especially in pro wrestling? So, all this to say is that the wedding still gets me. The proposal, the montage, the actual moment, the reading of the vows, the celebratory ending with, I don't know, confetti, balloons, all of that. I mean, who wouldn't want to have an ending like that? And if you want to have a big ending, Bluechew code Denise. All right, keeping it going with some more highlights of SummerSlam 1991. Let's get into the wrestling. Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect. Now, this was a match I had already seen. However, it had been years since I actually rewatched it. So it almost felt like rewatching it for the first time again. Even though it had been like more than a decade since I had last seen this match. And the thing about this is when you're watching the entire show and not just single moments or matches from a show, you're able to really compare it to everything else and everything that came before it. So fresh in my mind was all of the previous SummerSlams that I watched. And then we go into this match, and instantly the first thing that popped into my head was, damn, Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect just move differently than everybody else or than the good majority of people. And so what you get here is a brilliant match with Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart. And the funny thing about this too is, going back to my child mind, I used to really believe that Mr. Perfect was perfect. All of those little vignettes and things, I remember one in particular was my favorite one because I was in awe. And it was the one where he throws the basketball into the net and he does it backwards. And I remember watching that and going, oh my God, he is perfect. And so, anyways, that's just like my fun little memory about Mr. Perfect. But this was so much fun because the second that Bret Hart got that sharpshooter in on Mr. Perfect and won the Intercontinental Championship, and yes, guys, another Intercontinental Champion is crowned at SummerSlam, twice with the Ultimate Warrior, then with the Texas Tornado, and now with Bret Hart. The next highlight that I want to talk about is Virgil defeating Ted DiBiase for the $1 Million Championship. And the reason that this to me was a highlight was because Ted DiBiase always treated Virgil like shit, right? He had him do awful things. They even reached cap some of it with him having to take the fungus out of his feet. Ugh, I even hate the word fungus. And him having to like clean his shoes and all these really terrible things, right? And so Virgil goes into this match and immediately attacks Ted DiBiase. Like, Ted DiBiase isn't even done with his entrance and he gets attacked. And Virgil is moving so fast. He's clotheslining him. He throws out Ted DiBiase within like the first 30 seconds of this match. And he's completely like blown away that Virgil did this to him. Virgil was kicking his ass. And so Sherry, of course, gets involved and she ends up hitting Virgil with like a bout, and it's a DQ. And everybody's like losing their mind. Like, this match cannot end in a DQ at all. Like, this cannot happen, right? And so then instead, the referee basically says this match could end in disqualification. However, I'm not going to do that. So he restarts this match and he also kicks out Sherry from ringside. And so the match continues and we actually end up seeing Virgil get the win. And one of the things that always gets me excited about watching old wrestling is seeing the pops, because the pops basically tell you, one, who is over, two, what moments really gravitated towards someone, but three, it really tells you what meant something to those people at the time that they were watching, at the time that it was happening, right? And so the moment when Virgil wins the $1 Million Championship felt like the biggest deal in the world. And I thought that Piper, who was on commentary calling that match, made it feel like an even bigger deal because he was so freaking excited for Virgil. Like, when you're watching it, I can feel the excitement from the past now. And then for the main event, we saw Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior defeat the Triangle Terror. This was really like a nothing match, in my opinion. We had Sid Justice as a special guest referee. This really wasn't a highlight for me, but I felt the need to mention it because it was the main event. This one was a little bit too hokey for me, so that's probably why I didn't necessarily enjoy it too much. For the finish, we end up seeing Hulk Hogan throw powder on Sergeant Slaughter, hits his leg drop for the finish. So What was the best match of SummerSlam 1991? So, the best match of SummerSlam 1991 was definitely Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect. The reason being that that felt like the best wrestling match on the show. It's as simple as that. So, the match that I thought that was the worst and just by far the least interesting whatsoever was IRS versus Greg Valentine. That just didn't pique my interest at all. And it felt like it was just there happening, but it didn't really feel like it had any real significance rewatching this show. So now it's time to talk about the MVP. So you can go with Bret Hart because he became Intercontinental Champion, had the best match of the night, right? Or you can go with the Macho Man. Why? Because he got married. Dang, how do you not celebrate that? Well, I think I'm going to go with Bret Hart for the win on this one. As far as my rating, I'm giving it a 9 out of 13 because I genuinely did have a good time watching this show. Alrighty, everyone, it is time to get into SummerSlam 1992. Finally, the year that I was born. I was about a couple months old when this happened. So it's crazy to think about this because I was about like 3 months old when SummerSlam 1992 took place at Wembley Stadium. And the next time we had a wrestling show in Wembley Stadium was AEW for All In. And I got to be at that show. And I think at the time I was 31. So it really puts into perspective just how far apart these two wrestling events occurred in Wembley. With that being said, this played a huge role in my experience with watching SummerSlam 1992. Again, I had only seen probably like 3 things on the show. I had never watched the entire thing all the way through. So watching the show in Wembley, I couldn't help but to keep remembering my experiences at Wembley, and it kind of made me enjoy the show a little bit extra. And I try to put myself in that time period, which is very difficult to do. But the overall thoughts that I had about the show was, damn, it felt huge. It felt so huge to be on the show. It felt huge to be live. If you were watching the show live, I'm kind of jealous of you that you got to see this in real time. And also to the people that were at the show, because everything felt real big time. And it sort of felt like the one of the last big shows for this period of pro wrestling. So I do want to shout out the intro of this show. It's one of my favorite things, by the way. Watching old shows, I love to look at just like the production, right? Not just how it looks in the ring and how the format of the show is, but also the graphics, how they choose to intro the show. And this one I thought was kind of funny because it was really cute. It was so cute. They were interviewing fans about who they thought was going to win between the British Bulldog and Bret Hart. And I loved just like the excitement from the fans. I think that was really the thing that set the tone for the show. It set the mood for the show. It really made me think, okay, I can understand what people were thinking at this time because you were showing us what the people were thinking at this time. And I also want to shout out everybody that was there because damn, they had some really great costumes there. I saw people with some really good merchandise, outfits. It just looked awesome. It looked awesome. I also find it funny when AEW did it and when WWE did it because it's London, right? They're showing all of these touristy spots in London. Yet the funny thing is that London City Center is like 40 to an hour away from Wembley Stadium. And I know this because I got stuck in traffic on the way over there. I just really enjoyed seeing all the people there back then and then knowing what it looked like to actually be there. And also a cheap plug, please check out the video that I did at Wembley Stadium where I was interviewing fans and talking about them getting to be at AEW All In. It's a very fun video, and I don't know, it's just cool to kind of document that type of stuff. So now let's go ahead and get into some top highlights of the show. So, I want to start off with the Ultimate Warrior and Macho Man Randy Savage. So, their match, man, I felt like it was a full on Energizer Bunny status for the entire crowd because there was not one moment of silence in that stadium. People were yelling and screaming and making noise throughout the entire match. So, this match just truly felt like they had a lot of energy from the audience. And I really feel like that's what made me understand what this meant during that time. I loved that the entire time we didn't know who was sort of in cahoots with Mr. Perfect and Ric Flair. We didn't know who had been advising who or what the hell was happening. Was it Macho Man? Was it the Ultimate Warrior? And I loved the way that that played into the match and that they made you think for a second that, hey, it may just be Macho Man Randy Savage. And I loved how that played into the match with him basically being like, no. And we end up seeing Macho Man and Ultimate Warrior at the end of it go against Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect when Mr. Perfect and Ric Flair were attacking Macho Man and Ultimate Warrior had his back. Now, unfortunately, that kind of ended the match in a way that Ultimate Warrior clearly didn't want to, which was a count out. And that all happened because Macho Man was being attacked on the outside while the Ultimate Warrior had been laid out by them inside the ring. And so even though it wasn't like the perfect ending for a match, it had this happy ending between two big stars that people really cared about in Macho Man and the Ultimate Warrior. So the next highlight that I can't wait to talk about is the Undertaker versus Kamala. All right, so I have a lot of thoughts about this. First of all, starting with the Undertaker. To this day, this particular version, the earliest version of The Undertaker to me is still the absolute creepiest, the scariest version of The Undertaker, where he has that like really, really white skin, like he looks like he's from Transylvania. Shout out to the movie Transylvania, really fun movie. Anyways, whatever. He really looks so freaking terrifying. And it's funny because even knowing The Undertaker and seeing his whole career, when you go back and you watch it, every single time I see The Undertaker like this, I always get these like goosebumps and I'm always scared. I sort of always revert back to my childlike self when I first saw The Undertaker. And I remember I had this is really embarrassing, but I had this theory as a kid because, I still believed that everything was real. It was still real to me, damn it. Um, I used to think that The Undertaker was truly dead, like truly dead. And I thought that The Undertaker just came back to life to wrestle. Like, I legitimately believed that. That's what I legitimately thought as a child. So I thought the finish of the match was super freaking lame, right? Because Kimchi goes in there, hits The Undertaker in the gut, and that's a DQ, right? Super lame. But let me tell you, there was one moment that made this whole thing worth it to me. Worth it. One thing. And that is after the match, we saw Kamala go in and continue the attack on The Undertaker, right? He hits him with the splash. He hits him with all of his the deadliest possible attack that Kamala can impose on The Undertaker. And The Undertaker is basically left there, lying there in the mat, right? So he thinks he's done. He's out. And then what does The Undertaker do? He comes back up, right? And then my favorite part of the entire thing was Kamala's face. And and it's like the perfect reaction ever. If I was watching this live and social media was a thing, I would have been memeing that so freaking fast, man. So freaking fast. And so I was dying, and I mean dying at this. And so it made it all worth it. This whole thing was worth it because of that one moment. And I thought it was funny too because afterwards, The Undertaker goes after Kamala, and Kamala's like legit scared. He's like speed walking the hell out of there, and The Undertaker's like walking all scary. Oh, this was good. Like they made me feel bad for Kamala at the end. Like at the end, I felt terrified for him. So, one of the other highlights for me for SummerSlam 1992 was Shawn Michaels versus Rick Martel. Man, this was so freaking silly. It was full on dramatics, guys. We know WWE is so good at the dramatics, and that is exactly what we got here. And you know what? I ate it up. All right. I ate this up. And okay, so let's talk about what went down, what was going on. So, Of course, Sherry is with Shawn Michaels. We know that. But Rick Martel has sort of been giving her the eyes, and she's been liking it. Like, good for her, girl. She was getting like, come on, let's be real. It's good for her. And so during this match, during this match, Sherry basically says that there is no hitting in the face. That is sort of the thing that has been put on this match. You cannot hit the other guy in the face because they're both too beautiful to hit. So Sherry then ends up fainting, and this distracts Shawn and Rick. And what we end up getting here is this back and forth from the ring to the entrance. Now, keep in mind, this is a very, very, very long walkway, okay? And a lot happened from point A to point B. Shawn Michaels picks up Sherry's fainted body, and he sort of drags her and carries her over the shoulder, right? So super, like, he doesn't care, like, so unlovingly, does not really give a damn, right? And then Rick comes in and starts attacking Shawn Michaels, and they start walking away from Sherry. And Sherry gets up like she's not really fainted at all, and she sees what's going on, and she ends up fainting again, right? So she's faking it. And so then we see Rick Martel come back for her, and he carries her in a little bit more of a loving way. So then Shawn Michaels comes in and hits Rick Martel, takes her body, and then Rick Martel comes in, hits him again, and then her body falls again. This happened like 4 times, guys. 4 times where one of them would pick her up, the other guy would get mad, hit him, and drop both of them, and then rinse and repeat again. Finally, until we got to the ending where Rick Martel suddenly comes out with a red bucket of water, and I thought he was actually going to throw it to Shawn for whatever reason, I don't know. And then he ended up throwing it to Sherry, right? So he throws it to Sherry, and she's left there all wet and stuff, and she's angry because her plan backfired because both guys, Shawn and Rick, ended up fighting all the way out. So she ends up chasing after them. And this was freaking hilarious. Like, it was so stupid. It was hilarious. It was so funny just seeing them go back and forth. And my favorite part of this was that every time they tried to defend her honor, they were dropping her on the floor. I'm like, you guys are making it worse. And that was the comedy in this. So I really appreciated the comedy for what it was. Very, very fun to just watch that back. And of course, last but not least, the other big highlight of the show was the British Bulldog defeating Bret Hart. This was another match that I had already seen, but just to kind of reiterate, it was still good watching it back. And then also, I think the things that really stand out when you're watching it is, 1, it's a really good wrestling match. 2, you got the family component there with Diana watching on. And then 3, you have the British Bulldog win the Intercontinental Championship in London. Like, it doesn't get happier than that. Come on, let's be real. It's awesome. It was a great moment with them all hugging at the end. It was just a very nice ending to a really good show it felt like a lot of big moments. So now, best match of the show. I don't know which direction to go here because I feel like I can go with Macho Man and Ultimate Warrior, but then I could also go with British Bulldog and Bret Hart because the match because I liked the ending to British Bulldog and Bret Hart a little bit more. I'm gonna go with them being match of the night. Worst match was Nails versus Virgil. This was just the shits. And the ending was terrible with the sleeper hold. I did not like this at all. As for MVP, I'm going to give it to Bret Hart for the work that he did with British Bulldog and also putting him over in London. Great stuff there. As for my rating, because of the significance of it all being in Wembley and there being a lot of really good highlights in this, the big moment with British Bulldog, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 10 out of 13. Alrighty, everyone, there you go. That is a wrap for SummerSlam 1991 and 1992 Rewind. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Of course, let me know in the comments section your favorite memories of these shows and what do you think of these Rewind videos? Let me know, and do not forget to check back tomorrow for another episode. Plus, make sure to give some love to our sponsors, Bluechew, for sponsoring your SummerSlam, and check them out by clicking the link in the description box below. If you missed episode 1, where I talk about SummerSlam 1988, 89, and 1990, you can go ahead and click on the screen to watch now. Plus, don't forget to subscribe.